the 31st, 1908, in a tent between Duchesne and Mighton.
Okay.
And my mother didn't have a bed to sleep on, have me on. So they went and brought
Who was your mother?
Spicy Ann Fisher,
And how old was she?
25.
And who was your father?
Walter Lou Gene Fisher from Charleston, West Virginia.
And how old was he?
24. He was a year younger than Mother.
And your sisters?
Lotus is 3 years older than I am, and he was born in Charleston, West Virginia. And what was it today on that thing? 1905.
Okay.
And then Hattie was born 18 months after I was. And then
Henry?
Howard, and he was, I don't remember the year he was born, and he passed away when he's 11 years old in Buell, Idaho, when we come there in 1925. And then Henry, and I don't know their ages.
He's 80, so he would have been
He's 80
a week ago, so.
week ago. And then Lorraine was born on leap year in Oasis, Utah. And she was a change of life baby for Mother. It was like raising two families.
Was anybody else born in Mighton besides you? Was Hattie born?
Hattie, Howard, and Henry.
Were all born in Mighton?
Mighton, Utah. Mm-hmm.
And from Mighton you went?
To Salt Lake for about a year. And Dad got a job on the railroad, and we went, and Mrs. Curtis, that lived Mother's neighbor up on the lease, she wrote to us in Salt Lake and told us to come to Oasis, Utah, down in Millard County. And it was the most desperate, it was a lot worse than Mighton. And Dad, we had to live in a 2-room house.
And that's where Lorraine was born?
That's where Lorraine was born.
You went to Buell?
And then Dad got a job on the railroad and saved his money, and he got a job on the section, and they give him a free rent 2-room house to live in. And Mom and Dad saved every penny they could because they knew we couldn't live there. There was nothing there. And so we took and Lourdes got a job on a farm. And we tried to go to school, but we could only go to the 8th grade. I mean, 9th grade. And
This is in Buell?
Oasis, Utah.
This is still in Oasis.
And Lotus and I wanted to go to school so bad, so we would go, they'd let us go back to school.
What years of school did you attend in Mighton?
Let's see. We left there in 1921.
Okay.
And she was born in 8, so you were 13.
And I spent a year in Salt Lake, and then we went to Oasis and stayed 2 years.
Do you remember any of your school teachers' names in Mighton?
Mrs. Cooper and Cooper. I remember Mrs. Cooper because she lost her mind. And we didn't have no teacher for a while. And you could hear, she lived close to the school with her mother, and we could hear her screaming and hollering, so I don't know whatever happened to her.
What, in Mighton and Duchesne, who is still there now?
Of our folks,
Mm-hmm.
nobody in Mighton.
Okay.
and Verda and George, Doris and Sarah is the only ones
What's
that
the last name?
Fitzwaters. They're my cousins and their mother's oldest sister's daughters.
And what was their mother's name?
Aunt Louie. We always was allowed to call them aunt and uncle. We never was allowed to
Do you
say
remember what Aunt Louie's husband's name was?
Bill Fitzwaters.
Okay.
And yesterday at Henry's, his two sons was there, Homer and Jack.
Okay.
And she had 12 children.
Now, how many, were there any other family members that were in Mighton when you were there?
Yes, Aunt Mary and Uncle Tom and Alice
Last names?
Brown, Tom
Okay.
Brown, and Aunt Mary. And their children is Jean Brown, Logan, Virginia, Alice, and Walla. They're my closest relatives as my cousins. We become closer because we were together more. We went to school with them.
And were there any others? Cousins? Now, these were Grandma Watts, or Fisher's
Sisters.
sisters.
Mm-hmm.
How many of them were there
12.
that lived in?
No. Daisy passed away in Charleston, West Virginia, and she was 8 years old. You want me to tell them about my mother's folks?
A little if you can, if you remember.
My mother and dad came, they joined the church in Charleston, West Virginia. The missionaries come back there. And Grandpa, they were all young folks in their teens and 20s. And Bill Fitzwaters married Aunt Louie, and I think some of her children was born back there. Because I think Verda, that you met out there, she was born back there. But Mother was pregnant with me on the way, was pregnant when they come on the train.
Uh-huh.
And Grandpa, they joined the church, and the missionaries lived there with them a lot. And Uncle Treby, Mother's oldest brother, he joined the war in the Philippines and left. But he was killed as he got off in the boat in San Francisco. And Doris passed away. Daisy. Daisy passed away before they left West Virginia. And some of the girls wasn't married. I think Mary, the younger, Eunice and Kimball, the boys, and Eldridge and George wasn't married. They always Uncle George never did get married. He was killed, they think, building the Boulder Dam. But they never heard from him after he went down there to work at the Boulder Dam. Never did. It hurt Mother so much.
Well, how many moved to Oasis with you?
Nobody. Dad got on the train, and we went down there and got off in that train, and that was worse than Duchesne.
And then,
Mighton.
was it 2 years later that you went to Buell, Idaho?
Yes. And
Who went with you from Oasis to Buell?
Hattie and I and Howard, all the family but Lotus, and he had a job down there on the farm. And he made a payment on a Model T car, and he paid for that, but he gave it to Dad to come to Idaho.
And where did you live in Idaho?
In Peckadishan, in Buell, in a 2-room house.
Did you have a farm there?
No. When Mom and Dad got on there after I got married, and we all got jobs. And Lotus quit the job down in Oasis, and he come home, and then Uncle Bill wrote him a letter and asked him if he'd like to work in the post office in Duchesne, and he went to Duchesne and lived, and spent almost half of his married life in Duchesne as a postal clerk under Uncle Bill. Uncle Bill was a postmaster in Duchesne.
Who was in Peck Edition? Was there anybody born in?
No, Lorraine was born in Oasis, and she was 18, let's see, was it Danny or her? She was just a baby.
Now, how old were you when you moved into Buell?
About 16 or 17, somewhere in there. 1925. I was born in 1908, and we went there in 1925.
Oh, okay.
How old was I? 17 years. Yeah, you're right.
Now, you did not go to school in Buell?
No, I got me a job, and boy, I went to working.
So, how far did you go in school?
The 9th grade.
9th grade.
Lotus and I, we didn't have no way to go to school. We were through school, our 8th grade, and Lotus wanted an education so bad, but we had no chance of going to school because there was no high school there.
Okay. What, when you were in Buell, did you work? Did you find a job?
Yes.
Doing what?
I got a job in a dairy, and I worked for $1 a day. And let's see that. But Dad, when that first summer we was there, Dad got us, Hattie and I, a job after school was out. Hattie went to school. A job, we went there in June, and he got us a job picking berries. We picked berries, and he gave us, we had to pick 2 little baskets for him and 1 for us. And so we took them home to Mother, and she got so many berries, she canned them. And then we got to selling them. And so we bought us a little silks, and Mother made some silk satin cloth, and Mother made us each a dress. And boy, did we think we was rich, you know. And then I got a job. Hattie had to go to school then, and I got a job in a dairy, and I worked for $1 a day. And Mother and Dad was so hard up that year because Howard had passed away in November. And so I took my first he only paid me once a month, and it was $30. And I took the $30 and went and gave it to Mama. And she would only take half of it. So Hattie and I go uptown, and we needed some powder and some lipstick. And we bought us each a pair of silk pants. And that's the first silk pants I ever had. So I went to bed, and I can remember rubbing up and down like this on my legs. Yep, because Mother made them out of, if you want really the real old truth, I'm telling you, she made them out of flour sacks.
I just don't want you to keep asking her things, she's just, do you want me to get your hair? No, I didn't have a question.
What, in Buell, where did you meet Dad?
I was working in this dairy, and his father and mother lived right straight across in front of this farm, only there was 40 acres between them. And this man didn't farm his farm, he hired it done. So he hired on to come up and plow the field in the field. And him and On had made it up that he would make me acquainted with him. So he calls me on the telephone and tells me to go out in the field and tell this man how to plow that field. I didn't know any better. I didn't know, you know. So I had to walk through a fence. And he was sitting and waiting for me on this car gator with these horses. And I had to go through this fence, and I got my leg caught on that barbed wire. So the dog started barking at me, and Don made him come back. And I walked up to him, and I told him, looked him right in the eye, and I told him exactly what Mr. Nyhart had said. And I turned and walked back, went through that fence again. In later years, when I said, "What did you think?" Because I would talk to him. And he says, "I just watched you go through that fence with those beautiful legs."
So was it love at first sight for him?
No. I guess it was for him. And then one day I worked outside in another building where the dairy was. I did it by myself. So when I got through, I went into their home, and they had a back porch, and there sat Mr. Nyhart and On again. And I walked straight in that house. I never looked at either one. I wasn't, you know. And then I had that spring come. I never saw him again. And spring come, and I wanted to quit the job, so Hattie took over and worked during the summer. And I went to Salt Lake. No, I worked there 2 years. Then the last year, Hattie took over while school, summer months, and I went to Salt Lake on the train and got me a job with my cousin in the store, Cress.
In Cresses?
Mm-hmm.
What did you do?
I clerked at the store, sold jewelry.
With which cousin?
Walla.
Oh, did you?
Uh-huh. And she was in where they sold, back in the fountain park. And I sold everything, kid.
Where did you live?
With Aunt Mary.
For how long?
3 months until Hattie had to go back to school. And I bought me some new clothes. And I bought me a beautiful hat that had flowers around it with a ribbon down the back. And I went back to Oasis on the train before I went home to see my best friend. And she wanted that hat so bad, and I gave it to her. And I kind of regretted it afterwards, because I couldn't find one like that. And she wanted that hat as soon as she saw it, but I gave it to her. And then I went back and worked, and then I got sick with kidney infection and had to go home. And I lost a lot of weight. And so one day, Dad said, "Don't you want to ride uptown with me?" And I got in that old Model T and rode uptown with him, but I never got out of the car. Lotus and I was real close. We always went to the dances together and everything, you know, and I never thought of boys very much. And so we went uptown, and I was sitting there, and somebody in this old Model T, and it's open on the side, you know, and pretty soon there was a lot of peanuts hit me in my lap. And I couldn't imagine where them peanuts come from. And I'd been real sick. And I had it when I was a young girl too. and I swelled up so bad, and it was my kidneys. So I turned around, and there stood on. He had seen me in the car, in Dad's pickup. So the next month, that was Saturday night, and then I don't know how he knew where I lived, but the next morning was Sunday morning, and I was mowing the side of the lawn, mowing the lawn, and he drove in the driveway and asked me if I would like to go to a picnic down at Hagerman, and I didn't know where Hagerman was. And so I went in and told Mother. She said, well, I guess. And so I went down with him, and I met all these folks that day down at Hagerman. And they had a potluck dinner, and that's the first time I ever ate chicken with chocolate cake. Oh, that was good. And boy, they have a food. And I met all these folks that day. And
Then did you date very long, or did you just get married right away?
oh
or-
no, we went together for off and on for a year.
Did you?
Uh-huh. And he lived up by the park where the schoolhouse is now. And I thought he owned I thought they owned their own farm, but they didn't. I thought that. They never did tell me the difference. So then they moved to Filer, and then that's when we decided we'd get married, and I went and lived with them for from September, August and September.
When did you get married?
In May the 11th, 1929, in Gooding, Idaho, at 2:30 in the afternoon. And he didn't dare to tell his mother and dad. And I had $5, and that's all the money I had. And he was broke after he bought the marriage license, and I didn't know that. And so he says, and I told my mother, we decided all at once we'd go get married. And I told Mama, and he didn't dare to tell his mother because they didn't like it because their children got married. None of them. They never liked it for none of them. So anyway, he says, could you give me that $5 and I'll go buy my mother a box of chocolates. And it was Mother's Day. And I gave him the $5 and he bought her a box of chocolates. And we went on to Filer, and you know, every Sunday all the Watsons was at Grandma's for dinner. So we had to tell them.
How long did you live in Buell with Grandma Watson?
We lived, I wanted to go home. I didn't like it. I didn't want to live with anybody I didn't know. But Grandma Watson did like it. She says, if you're married, you should live with him. So I stayed with them all that summer. And that fall, there was some people that were joining our farm there at Filer. And I walked down, I used to go with your dad every evening and help him set the water. That was my daily doings, was go with him setting water. And while we were out watering across the fence, why, Slim Hammond come over and started talking to us. He said he was going to move. And I said, when are you going to move? And he said, just as soon as the crops is out. And I said, is the house for rent? And he said, yes. And he told Mr. Bean that Filer owned the farm. And I said, could we move in it? And he said, well, you asked Mr. Bean. And so I don't remember ever going and asking Mr. Bean, but we got the farm, the 40 acres. Well, Mr. Watson had a falling out with the man that he was farming, that big 360-acre farm. They had to move. So we had a home, but they didn't have a place to go to. So they moved up the road and kept their cows and milked cows. And we farmed the 40 acres. And then we moved to that fall. Then we moved to let's see, Harry Callings' farm, 340 acres, out by the cemetery in Buell. And there was a great big house in it. So Mr. and Mrs. Watson moved on one side of the house, and we moved on the other. And there's where Dudley was born. Well, we lived at Folly when he was born on the 40 acres.
And what year was he born?
May the 5th, 1930.
And how long did you live there?
Just 1 year. And then we moved at Harry Callings's and lived in separate, the house was big. And so they lived in one part and we lived in the other. And then they moved down on Deep Creek on the Black Bear, out of Black Bear. And the American Legion, your dad was a Marine, and he wanted a farm. So the boys got together in Buell and found where we live now. And we moved out there, and there was it was a railroad boxcar we had to live in with a little shack on the end of it, homestead shack.
And where was Dwayne born?
He was born on the Harry Callings place, but he was only a month old when we moved to where we live on the 80 acres at Fairview.
What, and when was Dwayne born?
November the 11th, 1934.
18th, isn't it, or something? It's not. Hers is the 11th.
No, Dwayne,
Mm-hmm.
November the 2nd.
Is that what it is?
November the 2nd, 1934.
And then when did you move to Fairview again?
We never left there. I lived there since 1934. And I moved away in 1989.
And how big was the farm in Fairview?
For 80 acres.
And when did you buy the 40 acres?
1949.
40 acres.
1949.
Across the street?
Mm-hmm.
55, wasn't
Mm-mm. That's when we come back from Prescott. We bought it before we went to Prescott.
it? Oh. And when did you move to Prescott?
1949,
And why did you move to Prescott?
because of Donald Gary's asthma and him being so sick. He only weighed 35 pounds. He was 11 years old, and he was blue in the face and gasping for his breath.
When you moved to Prescott, who moved with you?
Nobody.
Boys?
Oh, boys, Donald and David and Danny. And Dwayne went to live with Grandma Watson until he could get through high school. And Dudley and your dad were supposed to live on the farm. But Dudley got married. I don't know what year. I forgot. It was
How
not,
long did you
it was
live in-
not, it was about 1952 or 3,
How long did you live in Prescott?
5 years.
And then you moved back in 19,
Let's see, Grandpa's
55, wasn't it?
55.
Did you come home at all during those 5 years to Idaho, or did you just stay down there?
There was a lady had a house across the street from me, and she wanted to sell it. And she didn't know how about going about it to do it. So I said, "You want me to sell that house for you?" And she said, "Yes. If you sell it, I'll give you the commission." So I started down the street, asked anybody if they wanted to buy a house. And I had it sold, I think, that afternoon. And she gave me enough money to come home on. And I didn't know Dudley was going to get married. Nobody ever told me or anything. And I put, school was out, and I took David and Danny and got them on the bus and come home. Well, you and Dwayne come home first.
The second time. First time we came home.
Yeah. We went to Lotus's, we got into Salt Lake, and I had to walk from the depot, to the post office. And Lotus took a taxi and put us in it and sent him to his house, me to his home. And then he says, "Sarah, I'm going to Buell, and another week, you just stay here until and I'll take you to Buell." So we went to Buell, and I went over to my mother's, and there was nobody home. But the next door neighbor walked out, and she said, "Do you know Dudley? He's going to get married." And I almost fainted. It was such a shock to me. I couldn't hardly stand it. So I got back in the car, and we started out to the farm, and we went into the sports. There was nobody home. So we come back to Buell, and we went in the sports shop, and there sat your dad, and he was eating a T-bone steak. And he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I come home. I made some money and I come home. I was homesick. I got a neighbor in Mrs. Cross in Prescott to take care of Donald Gary." And I stayed until the wedding was over and cleaned up the house and things. Then I went back. But I was here and Dudley, I never seen a child so happy to see anybody in his life when he saw me. And we was coming around the corner, and they were going into that place, trying to find a place to live. And that's the first time I ever saw Joyce. And then I stayed a month, and then I went back home with Emil Hahn. Emil and Olga Hahn was going to San Diego to see their son that was in the Navy. And Dwayne, I took Dwayne home with me then, and all you kids.
That's the first time we saw the Grand Canyon,
Or is it?
and the
Yeah.
only time.
Yeah. Yeah, Emil we went uptown and bought a lot of groceries. We put our meat in the Frigidaire and everything, and the next morning we wanted to get an early start, and we forgot our groceries. So we come across the place where they had watermelons and cantaloupes, and while we were trying to buy us a lunch, some great big old rats ran out from under the cantaloupes and watermelons, and we didn't want to eat them then.
So when did you leave Prescott, Arizona?
1950. Was it 55?
Mhm.
Okay. That's the year Grandpa Watson passed away. He died in March, and I come home in June when school was out. You folks come, Dad and Dwayne come down there after me.
In the greenhouse,
No, in the rock house.
well, you wanna tell us about the greenhouse? Chartreuse green? Remember we had the house, Dad had the house built, remodeled,
Yes,
and we was coming home. And you told us the first time it was chartreuse green,
oh,
and we didn't know what chartreuse was.
yeah. You remember the first time that I told you I was gonna buy me a car? When I got those, picked those potatoes and everything, made enough money to buy me a car? I said I'm gonna buy a white car. And you kids, oh mother, a white car? Who ever heard of a white car? They was always green and black and gray.
So when did you, when you come back to Buell, who was married? Just Dwayne, or just Dudley?
Just Dudley.
Wait just a minute, that's just part of it. It's probably Lucille. This phone is for you, Mom.
So when you come back to Buell,
Yes.
who came with you?
Danny and David and Dwayne and Donald.
So Don come back this time.
Yes, we flew him to Biloxi, Mississippi, and we stayed a year then later, and they told us to bring him back, take him out of school. He wouldn't live but about a year.
What did they do for him there?
They give him new medicine, and he did get better. You know,
Did you have to go stay with him there?
no, he flew by himself with Harry Weaver and his daughter that had asthma. We went, that Mother Lorraine and I took him to Phoenix, Arizona. Mama come down there, and I was supposed to be operated on, but they wouldn't do it, so she come back. And Mother and them come and got me and took me back to Buell one time. Lorraine and her did.
So what, when you lived in Buell then, what did you do on the farm?
Well,
Did you have cows?
no, we never did go back. We had cows from the time we was married until we sold out and went to Prescott, Arizona. We always had cattle and chickens and things. Raised grain, potatoes, and hay. One time we raised sweet alfalfa. Sweet alfalfa. We was gonna, and it was a beautiful crop, but it wasn't no good. And that's the only thing I know we raised. Corn and hay and potatoes
What
and
t-
beans.
beans?
Mhm.
Now,
And we had horses. We didn't have tractors. Well, we had one tractor, but, oh brother, it was worse than horses. Never no rubber tires on it or nothing.
what about potatoes? What did Dad do on the potatoes?
Well, Dad, I guess I can tell this now, but I've always kept it a secret until after my dad and Lon passed away. But Dad came out one day when we were living on the 80 acres, and he said, Sarah, why don't you talk to Lon? Because he said, you know, you're giving half of this crop away every year. And he said, you could make a down payment or something. He said, try and see if you can't buy a home and have a home. You folks need a home. My dad told me that. So I got the lady's address that owned the farm, and it was Serena Matthews from Pullman, Washington. They homesteaded on that farm in 1906. She also homesteaded on that 80 acres across the railroad tracks as you cross the railroad tracks east of Buell. There's a red brick home there now when you make the curve. She owned both of them farms. He was a professor at Pullman, Washington, and she was a house mother for the college. And she wrote back and said yes, she was willing to sell the farm. So Dad took the letter up to Mr. Amos in Buell and showed it to him. And he said, "On, you couldn't pay for that farm in a lifetime." He said, "Forget it." He said, "You couldn't never pay for that farm." It was $16,000. Well, the government had stepped in and give all the soldier boys their payment that the time they had served in the army. So your dad had taken the money and bought a combine, and Henry, my brother, helped him run it. And he made pretty good. So he bought 1,000 head of sheep, or 100 head. And I said, well, yes, we can. So I wrote back and told her that we can take that, pay for it with that much interest. It was 6% interest. She wrote back and said, I'll come back to 4%. And I said, on, sell your wool and your sheep and make a down payment. Then we can live off in the farm and make the payment what comes off in the farm, and we can live on the cream check. Oh no, we can't do that. And I said, let's try it. And he said, no. Mr. Amos said we can never pay for the farm. So she wrote back again. She wanted to know why we quit writing, and I told her. And I begged him. So he went and sold. By that time, we sheared the sheep, and he got $1,000. And I said, now take that $1,000 and make a down payment on the farm. Sell the sheep and make another down payment. He couldn't see through that at all. So he did it. I wrote her another letter and told her we'd buy it. And then that spring, we done made a down payment. And so that spring, he planted beets. And they got about that high, and they froze down, just black. And he says, I'm not going to go out there and plow that ground again. And so he says, I'm going to disc it up, and I'm going to plant potatoes in there. And he planted potatoes that from our house to John Paluchik's, that 40 acres. And they were beautiful crop, just beautiful. And so that fall, the wind was blowing, and I had a chicken on boiling, and I never will forget it. I was going to have chicken and dumplings for supper. You kids was in school. Two men knocked on the door, and Dad was in the other room, and he said, "Is Mr. Watson here?" And I said, "Yes, he's asleep." And he said, "What do you want?" Real loud. And he says, "We want to buy your potatoes." Well, he says, when they get the $4, come back. Well, they got in the car and they went down to Fairview. And they stayed about an hour and a half down there. And pretty soon they come back and they knocked on the door. And you kids is home from school then. He said, you tell Mr. Watson those potatoes are sold. So that was it. So, she'll never know my story, will she? And, anyway, why, the check come. And it was you or Danny was the baby, just in my arms. I think it was Danny. And, it could have been. Anyway, the check come and it was $18,000. And he said, I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna buy me a team of horses and I'm gonna buy me this and a piece of machinery he needed, you know. And I said, oh no, we're not. I said, we're gonna go pay this farm off. I said, you can always buy a team of horses, but you can't pay a farm off. And I went to the telephone and I called Grandma Watson up. And I said, Grandma, will you babysit while we go to the courthouse in Twin Falls? And she said yes. And so I hurried up and got ready and took the baby. And she had dinner for us. Pork chops, fried potatoes, cornbread. You know, Grandma. We got in the car and we went to the courthouse and we had to sign a lot of papers, put stamps, you know, on it and everything. And it was dark time we got home, and she wrapped up the baby and walked out, and one of you kids sat between us. And she walked over to Ann and she said, Ann, this must be the happiest day of your life. You're the only Watson that owns a home. And you've got to give credit where credit belongs. And she pointed to me. And she said, you must remember, Ann, you got a home. And she gave the baby to Ann.
What,
And then, when I got it, you'll find it in my papers, son. It's a big piece of with all these deeds that she, from 1906 until 19, and we paid for it. And she got that farm back from everybody she sold to. You'll see it on there. Remember the Rosencrantz boy?
we're not interested in that one.
Okay. He
What,
was one of them.
What, now when did you move to the 40 acres across the street?
1956.
And you lived there until 1989?
Mm-hmm. Raised 5 boys there, and they call it the Watson Corner. You can talk to anybody. They always called it, in years, they still call it the Watson. The lady not very long ago told me that they still call it the Watson Corner.
And did you raise anything other than the crops and the cows? Raise any goats?
Yeah, we raised pigs, calves.
When did he start horse racing?
Oh, that was in the 60s, I imagine. So he always had horses.
But didn't he start racing in 1958?
Well, where was we at when you had that picture?
It was
That picture shows it, that there shows it, 1968.
It'd been 58. Same year Henry was born. Because I went with him the first year. And we went to Bend, Oregon. We went to Ontario, Oregon.
Portland,
Portland, Oregon. Then Ely, Nevada.
and Ontario, Oregon. Here's
Yeah.
where you throw the hamburgers at us, in the cafe.
and then, Elko, Nevada.
Yeah, in Utah. He went
Yeah,
to
Salt
Utah.
Lake City. But I didn't go with him to Salt Lake or Reno.
Oh,
But now, then how long did he race horses?
all those years.
From 1958 until 1960.
68. Well, it's, if you're looking at that picture there, that shows you.
That's the last.
No, the last time he run was, Glens Ferry, Idaho.
In what year? Do you remember?
Well, he'd be in the sixties and early no, it'd be in the sixties,
And he passed away when?
1972.
Do you remember the date?
Yes, I do.
February.
February,
When did Dad die?
February of 71.
No, two,
Two, that's right. Mhm.
but I can't, I did know the date.
I thought it was the 22nd.
I think it was two.
Then what did you do?
I stayed there I was working at the Bean House. I stayed home for two weeks after he passed away. And then I went back to work, and I worked a full year, or 2 years. No, and Dudley moved to Washington, and left me all alone.
When
And-
did you go around the world?
1978,
And who did you go with?
Bernice Baird,
And how long did it take you?
like in one day to be 2 months.
And where did you stay?
I stayed, well, each place,
For 1 month. The big ones.
the big places.
Ones you remember.
Oh, well, I started we left Buell and went to Twin Falls and got on a plane and then flew into Salt Lake and got on a 747 and flew to Denver, Colorado, and flew then into New York City at the Kennedy Airport. Then we got on 747 plane for Iran. We landed in London, England that morning, the next morning, and then we flew to, well, where did we stop? Then we flew to Iran. Tehran, Iran.
And how long did you stay there?
I stayed there 1 week. Then we took a trip, 10-day trip to Jerusalem. We left and we flew into Tel Aviv. Then we drove a bus from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. We stayed there 10 days. We toured all of the Holy Lands, this Galilee Sea, the Dead Sea, I can't tell you all the names that we went to, everything there. Took us 10 days. It was the most wonderful trip, but I was very disappointed because I thought the Savior's manger would be straw. Instead of that, it was marble. And I was so disappointed because that's all I'd ever heard, Jesus in his manger.
Now and then where did you go?
Then we took a world's tour, another tour it was the Woman's World's Tour. we went to um, Hong Kong, Singapore. I've, I've,
Tokyo?
yeah, we went to Tokyo and Russia, the border of Russia, to the Caspian, the Bali. Went to the island of Bali and stayed 3 days on our rest. We really traveled, and they took us there and rested us for 3 days or 4. I can't remember exactly how many. Then we come back to Iran and went on another tour of the Asia. We went to the border of Russia, the border of China. They wouldn't let us in then, but they took us as far as we could. And Hong Kong, Singapore, Bangkok, all of those places. And then we were on our own then when we got into Bangkok. Then we bought our own ticket to Japan. We went on the fastest train in the world in Japan. Then we got so tired that we got us a hotel, and this is where we saw that fast train. When we woke up the next morning, we got up and we went down there and bought us a ticket. And we were going so fast, and Bernice just happened to say, "Sarah, we better look at the number where we got on." Well, we were going so fast, we didn't know when we was going to get to that number, and it was 93. But always, you don't see anything because you're going so fast. But it was a thrill. Then we come back and we toured Japan. Then we got a plane and we landed in San Francisco, and Dwayne met us. But he got in a traffic jam, and he was 3 hours late. We couldn't, on the Golden Gate Bridge. We didn't get home till after midnight that night.
Now, did Dad like to hunt?
Oh, very much.
And did you like to hunt?
Yes. Shoot. Don't you remember those 3, 4 deer we shot up there in Shoshone Basin? They just rolled down that hill line. Our toes were so cold we couldn't walk. We sat down on a log, and here come Dad and Danny over the hill and pushed them all coming down. We got to meet your deer that morning.
Yeah, we did.
And that couple, if they hadn't have brought, it's a good thing each one of us had our license. And the people from Castle Ford had that bike made, to haul them out with.
Mm-hmm.
And they let us haul them out. And they're my best friends now. I fish with them all the time. Yeah.
When did we, when you sold the farm,
Yeah.
how much did you sell the farm for?
I'm not going to say,
Okay.
because people can't believe they don't believe that I made that much money, and I don't like to tell it.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, and what money I did have.
Mhm.
See, they don't realize what, I only had $65 when Dad died.
When you come back, did you take any other trips other than running around the world?
No, I took a United States tour twice. I've been to all over the United States except the South, and I don't want to go down there. We started to Monte Carlo, and we didn't. They said it was too bad a place for us to go. But the first tour that I took, I went to the Portland Rose Parade after Dad died.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to the World's Fair in Spokane. Then we come back, Bernice and I, and rested a while, and I got everything in order. Then we went to Washington, D.C., and we stayed there 3 weeks and toured Washington, D.C. And the most wonderful thing that was there was Arlington National Cemetery. And we went out on one of those tour buses, and I was so interested to look at and everything, we forgot the bus. It went off and left us. So we go down to where they were burying people. We saw the beautiful white horses that take those soldier boys to their graves, and the black horses. I sat there on that bench all afternoon watching that, and they bury an average of 14 persons a day in that cemetery. I've got all this wrote down. I tried to remember everything. And the library in Washington, D.C. I went to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. I took everything, we went to all those great monuments of the great men that you see now, Washington. And then we went to Boston. I went from coast to coast that year.
Now, when did you start fishing?
When I was about 8 or 9 years old,
Who'd you fish with?
Alice and Wallen, Bert and Bessie and all of them, whoever Hattie, and my dad.
Well, I never, when I was growing up, now, we never went fishing until I was at least 14. And then we started fishing again.
That's
Tell us about
because
Riley
she
Creek.
was being a mother, probably.
Oh, I had to work too, David.
Tell us about Riley Creek.
Oh, well, Donald Gary come home when your dad was a man, when he got in that car, he was gonna go where he went. We'd ask him to take us places, but no, he had his set
Okay.
on the way where he was going, and that's the way. So Donald Gary got in with some boys in Buell, and they took him down to Riley Creek. Well, Donald Gary come back and told me about it. So he took us. Donald Gary took us the next year. I knew and Danny, and we went down there, but I wasn't allowed to fish then. Just you kids was fishing, and you could get 15. And so we was down there fishing, and we had 14, and there stood the game warden, and not Grover Davis, and I knew him. And Dad was standing there, and I said, David, you get out of that water, because I said, both of you is fishing, you and Danny. You're going to get 2 fish, and that's all it took was Grover Davis. He was standing right there, and I knew him real well. Boy, you did wrong, you got it. So Daddy wouldn't get out, but you did. And just as you got out, Danny caught the 15 fish. So from then on, all my grandchildren went to Riley Creek. And then in a few years, they let everybody fish. You know, just children for years. So one time, later years, I took Brian, and I only had one fishing pole, and I got it with green and gold stamps at Idaho department store. That's the first I ever had. Well, it broke. So I finally got me a new one. But Brian wanted to go with us. And you kids, you and Danny and Brian and I. So we went down there, and this great big pipe. And we went about 4 o'clock in the morning. And I toasted a whole loaf of bread. And we were supposed to eat our breakfast, you know, and we had orange juice and apples and stuff like that. So, anyway, they wouldn't open it till 7 o'clock. Well, we cut the weeds all down. We had our chairs sitting there, and I went down to the river and caught them old red horse and cut that meat up, you know, because it was against the law then to fish with trout. So we always had to fish with that old red horse meat. And I had a whole bucket full of it with worms. Well, Brian put his hook in there, and the old, I'd put tape around that thing, adhesive tape, you know, to hold Brian's pole, you know. And he caught that great big one. Oh, it was big. And I asked the people if they would take their lines out of the water. And Al Kramer and his 2 grandkids was there, and they wouldn't do it. So and the game warden was standing, it was another game warden then, and he was standing right behind me. And he said, "You help that boy get that fish out there." So I helped him get it out. Well, we caught and so then 2 or 3 years later, we went back, and I could fish then. And so I put this old white meat on, but I held my hand over the white meat till I could throw it in the water, you know, because I didn't want other people to see what I was fishing with. And the Herb Brothers was across the creek from me, you know that creek, David, where you fish. And they said, "Boy, did that big one catch that." Oh, I come out of there with one of them great big ones, you know. And them Herb Brothers, even today, they ask me about fishing. And I pull it right up in front of them, you know, getting it out, you know. And we always went down there. And one time I took Brian after he growed up, and I'd take him so early. You know, I'd go get him and have everything ready and everything. Can't you remember me hollering down the basement at you kids to get up?
Yeah,
Can't you remember that?
yeah.
We'd all go down there before daylight. The West boys, I taught them how, the Schroeder boys, all those kids.
Can you tell us, can you name off some of the old fishing holes you used to fish in?
Yes,
What were they?
a Deep Creek, back of John Goodhue's.
Mm-hmm,
Remember that?
yeah,
And Frankie Dolan's,
yeah.
and
Now on Deep Creek.
Deep Creek over by Cox's.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there was some nice ones there. We'd walk from old Henry and I go over there, spend the whole afternoon walking up and down that creek. By ourselves, after you kids started school and got married and
Yeah.
everything. And I did that till I sold the farm.
Name some of the other fishing holes.
Salmon Dam, Roseworth,
Mhm.
Magic Dam, and Clear Lakes. We used to fish a lot at Clear Lakes,
Mm-hmm.
but they put such a price on you now that just a millionaire could fish down there.
Yeah. What do you fish now?
I fish down where it's easier to fish. I don't fish at Deep Creek anymore because the water's no good. There's too many dairies over there. And I fish at Weaver's and at the country club down at Buell.
Mm-hmm.
And I do fish over here on the park sometimes by the hospital.
The power plant?
Uh-huh, and the power plant, I was down there the other day. There's where I got that rock. But I didn't have very good luck the other day.
That's the power plant down by Buell?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's Twin Falls isn't no good place to fish, too.
And let's see. I'm trying to think of some other fishing places we've been. Weavers?
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about Weavers.
Well, Weavers, I didn't know Weavers lived there, and I saw Mrs. Weaver uptown one day, and she said, I know you love to fish. Why don't you come over and fish? But don't fish in the ponds, just fish below them. That's years ago. And I've really caught nice fish there. But they've sold it now, and they're kind of particular who comes in there and fishes, you know.
But they'll still let you?
Yeah, they'll still let me fish, 'cause I saw her down at Cactus Beach not very long ago, and she says, I don't see you over there very often, and I said, well, had to have my toe operated on, and I haven't been down there very often.
What about down at Thousand Springs? Or the
I
Fit Nut?
fished there, and now they charge you to fish up above Thousand Springs, you know,
Mhm.
anymore. And there's so many people down there anymore, Henry.
What about the fish hatchery in Buell there?
I fish there all the time. You can fish there and catch all you want if you're 65 and older. But boy, it's getting fished out too. 'Cause there's a lot of people coming from Rupert, Burley, and everywhere there. But it's good. They're real nice fish.
Tell us about Henry, the dog.
Oh, that's a sad thing. But he was the smartest. You know, after you left there, he would, you know, when you kids went to school, he would get up, if he was in the house, he'd get up on the chair.
He was always in the house.
And he knew exactly when that school bus was gonna be out there in front of that.
Mhm.
And he'd go and meet you. And then you kids would get the paper and put it in his mouth and he'd bring it to me. Remember that?
Mhm.
And if I was gonna go fishing, I couldn't tell anybody that I was going fishing because he would, if I said fish, he would not eat a bite. And I never could put my clothes, fishing, I always wore just old rags, you know, fishing. I could not put them clothes on, them fishing clothes on, until he ate his breakfast. And I told Don, I said, don't say anything, I'm gonna go, but don't say anything. And one time Lon told me, he says, he's getting too old to don't take him. I've always regretted that. He followed me to that car. He looked up at me so sad. I've always regretted that because I didn't take him that day. And then Mother and I went down to Niagara Springs fishing. That big bridge there where that water goes and under there. And Mother was sitting there watching me. She'd sit in the car and watch me. And Henry there was a car coming. Henry got between me and that car. And he wouldn't let that car come. And the water was rolling and I didn't know that car. Mama couldn't find the honk on the car. And I was a fishing and I didn't hear him. And he laid down between me and that car.
How did he catch the fish for you?
Yeah, and one time I was fishing at Deep Creek and I wore a high top boot, rubber boots, 'cause there's snakes over there. And where he come from, I'll never know, kid. But he hit my back of my leg, and he went like that, and he jerked that head of that snake off, and that snake part of it hit me. Oh, brother, I didn't like that. But where he come from, I'll never know.
He was your guardian angel.
Yes. And then Bessie one time called me up and she said, Sarah, let's go fishing this afternoon. And I said, okay, as soon as I can get ready. So I got ready and went down, picked up Bessie, and we went down to Deep Creek. on the, going towards half. And, it just poured, but I let Henry out the car, and it just poured. And, he was out there looking up so sad at us, you know, and Betsy loved Henry too. And he was looking, and she said, Sarah, let him in. So I let him in the back seat, and then we turned around to look at him, and she wore real thick glasses, you know. And we both turned around and looked at him. He was just sopping wet, and he shook. Well, we couldn't see a thing after that. He just ruined our glasses. They told that at the Bessie's funeral. So then, one time we went fishing. Be able to shut this and off, kid, but I wouldn't tell you anyway. We went over to fishing at Deep Creek at a different place. A lot of black and just cattle in there, you know. And they had baby calves, and they had the stomach ache. Well, he went and rolled in it. So he got between Bessie and and I thought, Bessie, what in the world? Why didn't you change clothes? So she said, what'd you do, Sarah?
Oh,
And so we looked down and we tried all afternoon to get you know, he could outdo us. We couldn't get him in that water to save our souls. We got sopping wet before we got that dog place. And I was afraid they were gonna tell that.
oh yeah, that would have been a little much. Huh?
Well, did he catch the fish for you? Tell us how he caught the fish for you.
Yeah, when I first taught him to take me gone with him, he would bark at every fish. You know, when I pulled him out, he'd bark. He got so he wouldn't do that, but he'd catch them for me. You know, reach down and get them. He was so good about that. I couldn't say I was going fishing or anything. He would not eat a bite. And then he'd be hungry all day, you know. He'd eat after I got there, you know. But one time I went to Niagara Springs before daylight, all by myself. And I said, stay here, Henry. All I had to do is say, stay. And he stayed right with me. And pretty soon he began to growl, real bad. And I turned around and there stood a great big, tall, dark, colored man. But he was dressed up. And I thought, oh dear. And it was just getting daylight. And pretty soon I said, stay here, Henry. He stood right against my legs. And I throwed my pole out there and everything. And he growled real good again. And I turned around and there stood 3 white men all dressed up as their Kodaks. And then the next day I picked up the paper and there was their pictures, and they had come from Europe to learn how to raise fish.
How long did you have Henry?
13 years,
How long did you have your white cat?
8 years. And he's buried. Dutch Weston rolled a horse blanket around him and buried him out there by that, right by the back bedroom door. By the, when it would lightning, and I was picking beans, and there was when after that, he he would come to the bean house and come in and come over and sit down beside him. He knew exactly where I sat when it would lightning. He was afraid to death of lightning. If he was,
So you would take him into work with you?
no, honey, with lightning, he'd walk into town.
Oh my heavens.
And a lot of times he'd go to Bessie's. If Bessie, he would go to Bessie's. And one time it was lightning real bad, and I guess I quit work. We quit work, and he went to Mother's. And he knocked on Mother's door with his nose.
Hmm.
And Mama said, "Oh, what's that on the screen door?"
Hmm.
And she went to the door, and there stood Henry. And when I got home, Henry wasn't there. Pretty soon the phone rang, and it was Mama, and she said, "Come and get your dog."
Well, nobody told him he wasn't human.
No, but he was.
He was.
I never will forget the time Henry and Wanda come up, and we had a big garden, and they was putting cabbage and onions and potatoes in the back, Remember that? And he went over and reached in under what was it? Wanda's dress or Henry's pants or something. And somebody said, "Well, quit that, Henry." And
Oh. That was, Henry was hitting a rock out there at the end of the porch at the greenhouse. And Lila come up, and Henry was hitting that rock. Henry the dog reached over and licked Lila's leg.
oh,
And Lila says, "Quit that, Henry." And Henry looked up like,
he said,
What
"Well,
did I do?"
what did I do? It was Henry."
Henry the dog and Henry the fisher.
Did it bother Henry the Fisher to have Henry the dog named after him?
No.
No.
Oh, no. He loved that dog, too. No.
What else?
Well, her other interest is gambling. Did you
Okay.
talk about gambling?
Nope.
She's the luckiest lady in the world.
I counted, one night, I laid down and counted, and I've got it wrote down, how many times I have won things back here, even when I lived in Mighton.
Really?
Mhm.
You've always been lucky.
Well, to a certain extent, not too lucky, but
Seems like you're lucky to me. Give me 2 nickels, and as long as you put them in the machine, I'll win.
remember the night you put 3 in and got $60?
I know, but that's because it was your nickels.
Oh.
If you had to do anything different with your life, what would you do? Is there anything you'd like to do differently?
Yes, I would.
What would you do different?
I feel like that I failed in raising my children.
Why?
I
They're all fine, upstanding men.
Well, I know they are, and I'm very proud of them, but there were things that I didn't realize myself. I didn't know how to do. I did things because I was in such a strain all the time that I wouldn't have done otherwise. I know that.
Well, I think you did a good job.
No, I don't think so. If I'd had a better chance, yes, but I didn't have much of a chance.
Would you? Is there any place else you'd like to travel? You already did all your traveling,
No, I'd never go to Europe again.
wouldn't you?
Mm-mm, no, it's too dangerous. It isn't. It's not what I expected.
When you got there?
I saw lots of things that I never thought, I've touched things, if you think about it, I've touched the thing that, well, I can't explain to you, but I touched where the Savior,
Mhm.
tomb and things like that. I'm real proud of that, and saw what in
Mhm.
Jerusalem and things. But how people lived, I just can't get over how people live.
Mhm.
I'll,
It's so sad to see what people live and how they have to live.
Yeah.
gonna ask you some of your favorite things. What's your favorite song?
I know that my Redeemer lives.
You like that?
Mhm. I've always loved that song.
What's your favorite fishing hole?
The one with the biggest fish.
Yes. That's hard to say. I fished in Saipan with my 2 fingers out like that with strings hanging on them from the boat,
Mhm.
and they showed me how I could fish without a pole, and I caught them. They wasn't very big, but that's the way
But
they
you caught
fish.
'em.
Hmm.
What's your favorite food?
Gosh,
Sweet and sour.
sweet and sour pork and fried chicken, chocolate cake, lemon, Lemon.
Such a good cook you are too.
and beans and cornbread and onions and ham hocks.
And cherry dumplings.
Yes, and cherry dumplings.
Tell us the recipe for cherry dumplings.
Well, you pick your cherries and pit them, and put a little red coloring in them, and a lot of sugar and a pinch of salt. And then you make your dough out of flour, and you can put a little baking powder in it, but I like them tough. If you put baking powders in them, they kind of swell, and then you put, you cook the cherries real good, and then roll your dough out kind of thin, and cut it.
You put any egg in it?
No, mm-mm.
Just
Just
flour? and
flour,
water?
flour and water. Or I use milk because I think it's good for the children. And then cut them in just little strips and drop them in while it's boiling. Hmm. And you want it good. And
Is that an original recipe? Is that something you made up, or did somebody?
No, Lena, my sister-in-law, they had an orchard where they lived, and Ann and I went over there one evening, and Mrs. Watson, and Dudley was a baby, and she had made some, and boy, I thought that was the best stuff I ever ate. And I don't know, I guess all my children love them.
Oh, love 'em.
And even Adam, I cooked some one time when they was coming through and they were supposed to eat with me, and they didn't have time, so I just poured them in a dish and give it to him and ate it on the way home. Because I know he loved cherry, and I still got a lot of cherries canned. I should make a big batch for our,
Oh, for the reunion?
yeah,
Wouldn't that be fun?
yes. Hmm.
Now, when did you, with you and Dad, what was your favorite place to go?
Rodeos,
Filer Fair?
Filer Fair, and they're at his mother and dad's for dinner, you know. He always liked to go to Grandma's for dinner.
Where did you go to the rodeos?
Oh, everywhere. Pocatello. I want to tell you experience. We went to Blackfoot to watch the races. And when we stopped in Blackfoot and ate dinner at my Alice's cousin. A sister was waitress there, and I knew it. So we went in there and ate her dinner. And then we went on to the races. And as we sat down and got settled, I said, are we gonna bet between us? It was against the law to bet in Idaho then. I said, let's bet between us, Dad. We had silver dollars, you know. And he said, oh, I don't wanna bet. And I said, oh, come on. And a tall fellow sat down beside of me, a great big cowboy hat on and boots on, you know. He says, I'll bet with you, missus. I said, $1 every race? And he said, yes. So, an old Indian one time told me to always bet on a horse that just kind of took his time and not so feisty and all sweaty and everything. Kind of a calm horse, he said. Because the other horses give themselves out before they ever start. I never will forget that. And so I picked him out and he picked his out. And there was 8 races and I won every one of them. Every one of them. And that man, I said, where are you from? And he says, Ashton. I said, what do you do? And he says, I raise seed potatoes. But he says, you know what? He says, I haven't got enough money to buy gas to go home. And I said, oh, here, I'll give you. He just laughed. He patted me on the shoulder when he left. He was just not a very old man. So when we got home, I was telling everybody what happened to me. I made $8 off of this man. One time there's a Indian race, and they run without anything on them. They have to hold their arms around the, and I had to go to the restroom. So I said, well, don't bet on this one. But I hurried out and I got back and I said, which one did you bet on to that man? He said, that one with the white on him. And I said, I'll bet that one with the black. He's all black. And I wasn't even sitting down then, you know. I hadn't got back in time. And that old black thing won. And I just screamed and all. And everybody in that grandstand got to watching me, you know. And every time I won, I just let them know I won, you know. And he said, though, I ain't got any money to buy gas. When he got up, he said, I ain't got any money to buy gas. And he lived in Ashton, Idaho. And he raised seed potatoes.
So what do you, what's your favorite color?
Red used to be, but black anymore. I used to love red.
And you always look so pretty in it.
And I love to dance.
Yeah, I remember that.
I really love to dance. I learned it in Mutual when I was a young girl. And one time we had a contest out there at Mighton, and Mother and Aunt Mary, Alice's mother, made me a black dress, and then they popped popcorn and sold the popcorn on my dress, and I got the prize. And then one time Nora, my cousin from Duchesne, she come down and stayed a week with us, and they had a contest at the show. We were to guess how many people would be at the show. So I wrote down 250, and then next week we would know who got, you know, next. They only had show one day a week, you know. And so Nora says, well, I won't be here. I gotta go home. I'll just write your name down, Sarah, and put 252. So that night when they called our names, why, I got it. Well, Mother was with me that night, and they wasn't going to give me the $2.50 or whatever it was I got. I think it was $5 or something. But Mother went up and said, well, now, if her name's on that ticket, and she said 250, you give it to her, you know, my mother. So I got, and that's the first time I ever won anything. as I can remember it. But I got that wrote down, I got it on a piece of paper in my vault, how much I've won over the years. You know.
What else we got?
I like to do things for people better than anything. But I don't like to give people things that I don't think they need, because I'd rather give it to somebody that needs it. I've always had that feeling, if I could help somebody that needed it worse than the other person.
If
And
you
now-
had, if you had a closing statement, what would it be?
What's your advice to your family?
Advice to my family. Well, I'm proud of them, very proud of them. And I hope that they'll have good health and happiness the rest of their life.
That's great.
That's about the best I can say. I remember though, when I was raising Dwayne and Dudley especially, I always said, please don't smoke or drink. I always ask them not to do that. And I always said, don't smoke, don't drink, and when you see an elderly person, always speak to them. Treat them nice and be kind to them.
Good advice.
Is that enough? Hope so. 11 o'clock, been here 2 hours.